real parents, real stories. It's the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 42 of the Meet the Parents podcast and your weekly helping of parenting chat from some of your favourite bloggers. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and this week I'm joined by Amie from Finding Our Feet and Simon from Man vs Pink. Good evening, both of you.
Good evening.
So the podcast turns 1 this weekend, so what better way to celebrate than with a discussion about, well, death. But first, let's talk about 2 of my favourite topics, Lego and superheroes, and superheroines. We've talked about gender stereotypes previously, and Simon, as we've talked about before, your blog grew out of your desire to avoid that kind of thing. So you started up at about the same time that Lego brought out their Lego Friends range, which was very much girl-specific, as we've talked about before. But a few weeks back, you wrote a post about the new Lego Superheroes ranges featuring some of DC and Marvel's favourite, garishly garbed, superpowered heroes. Or should I say heroines, as a large proportion of the featured characters in these ranges are female. First of all, I take it you're much happier with this than you were with the original introduction of Lego Friends.
Yes, I am. The post I did was it was kind of generally about Lego and superheroes, female superheroes at the moment. So one line is this DC superhero girls, which is definitely targeted at girls, but it's in the Friends style in terms of the figure. But the thing that I was kind of against with Lego Friends were the colours were all pinks and pastels, and the themes of each set were kind of nail spas and beach resorts, and there's nothing active in the themes. And these sets kind of do away with that idea. So the sets are much more active, they're action-based, the colours much more sort of covering the spectrum instead of just the kind of pink and pastel palette. There's also in the regular Lego line, they're having more and more female characters coming into the sets. So yeah, there was this one set with Hulk and She-Hulk, and there's quite a few Lego Batman sets at the moment, but a lot of those have Batgirl in them and another character called Harley Quinn. And yeah, there was a Wonder Woman set as well. And I was just kind of noticed, like in January, there was all these sets coming out with female superheroes. It's just something I've noticed over the years has been a good progression in terms of that. It's still not perfect. There's still a minority of characters in these sets for the most part, apart from the DC superhero girls. But Lego are definitely making a progression on this, which is great.
It's easy to say, but it's only Lego, but it is still important, isn't it? I mean, how important would you say it is for girls, or actually for boys as well, to have access to female superhero characters in the same way as their male counterparts?
Well, I think my daughter still is naturally inclined towards stories with female characters. It's a way of her connecting into these stories immediately. It doesn't, she doesn't need to always have a female character for her to connect with it. There's plenty of characters that don't, but as a kind of almost a default, if it's got a female character in it, it will help her draw her in. So then seeing female characters in these worlds helps tell them that, yes, this is for girls too, because there's girls involved in this story. For boys as well, it's important for them to see women and female characters are part of these stories too.
I completely agree. It's slightly different, but when I was a kid, there was a movie called Cutthroat Island, and the protagonist was a female pirate captain. I've forgotten the actress's name, but she was quite famous in the 90s.
Gina Davis.
I must have watched. Yes, thank you. And I must have watched that 100 times in like the space of a year, because I just loved the fact that it was a woman in what up until that point had been a stereotypical male role, and there wasn't at the time other movies doing something similar. But I think it's great that they're starting to actually bring that through in all walks of life, whether it's a Lego toy or books, whatever.
Yeah, and Gina Davis, of course, was one half of Thelma and Louise, which, okay, maybe the ending isn't quite the example we want to be setting our kids, but again, very strong female roles at a time when female roles in Hollywood, particularly lead roles, were very much the exception rather than the rule. Amie, I guess Little Miss is a little bit on the young side for full-blown Lego at the moment, but do you find that she naturally gravitates towards girly toys and characters, or do you do anything in particular to steer her one way or the other?
She actually really loves Duplo, but all our Duplo is more kind of animal based, as opposed to they don't do superhero Lego, though she would love that. By pure chance, my mum got her a Supergirl dress for Christmas, and now her whole birthday party in March is superhero themed because she's obsessed. And a lot of her friends at nursery are boys, so they all like Spider-Man and they all come in with their Batman t-shirts and stuff, and so she runs around being Supergirl while they're the superheroes. So she actually has Spider-Man pants now as well, because she saw them in the shop and she was like, Finley has those, I want those. To be honest, it completely depends on her mood. She likes princesses as much, but then she got a flashing, like all singing, all dancing Lightning McQueen for Christmas as well from one of our friends, because she loves Cars, the film. And he's like, every red car we pass on the street is Lightning McQueen, and every pale blue car is Sally. But then her other favourite thing is to watch the Sleeping Beauty ballet. So it completely depends what mood she's in and just what she, I think, fancies that day. I think I've probably made a conscious effort to steer her away from pink things. My mum went through a phase, I think, of buying things on purpose that were pink because she felt like I was going too far. But,
I get that all the time.
But Little Miss definitely knows her own mind. If she wants to play with something pink, she'll play with something pink. And if she wants to be Supergirl, she'll be Supergirl. She always wants to be Beast as opposed to the princess. I always have to be the princess. Make of that what you will.
But I suppose on the other hand, she's now doing ballet classes, isn't she?
She is, but funnily enough, she goes to the same one as Simon's daughter. She's just in a different age group. But they do disco one week, they do tap one week, and she's now decided that actually she likes disco the best because the music is livelier.
With ours, I think none of ours actually do any dance classes at the moment, but I think if all three of them could do, they would do. And all three of them do gym classes as well, which in the past was much more of a girl's thing to do. I mean, now, particularly with the success of the British men's gymnastics team, that's become much more of a thing that's done by both boys and girls. And I think the classes that the kids go to are pretty close to 50-50 boys and girls, which is great. And again, that just helps to break down some of those gender divides, doesn't it?
It's bonkers, isn't it, that gymnastics was something that was perceived as feminine when it's such a show of strength, what the boys have to do, men have to do.
And I mean, Simon, other than Lego, are there any other toy categories or other kids' products where you think there's still some work to do in terms of either raising gender equality or breaking down some of those old-fashioned stereotypes?
From my perspective, I kind of see that, whenever my daughter is kind of going around in a superhero outfit, or she's got a Ray outfit that she kind of sometimes wears, and everyone goes, "Oh, you look so cool, she looks so great, it's wonderful." I think it's okay for girls to be into Star Wars, into superheroes, and in fact it's something they get complimented on. But the inverse doesn't happen in terms of boys showing an interest in, I don't know, My Little Pony or princesses or something. People are far less comfortable with that. I think it's not necessarily a toy industry thing, it's a society thing. For boys to show interest in stereotypically girls' interests is less acceptable, and that's an area I think needs to be developed. And it's kind of difficult for me because I don't have a son. I don't know what you think about that, Tim.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because we had a similar situation with our oldest Isaac when he was 2, 3, 4 years old, because it can work the other way, but it is more unusual. Now, I have talked about this before, but during his preschool years, Isaac loved all things pink. His favourite item of clothing was a pink jumper. He used to get his nails painted pink whenever he went to the hairdressers, and it was a big part of what his character was. And we were lucky that a lot of our friends who had kids of similar age really embraced that, and they supported it, they encouraged it. They bought him presents that were pink, and he loved it. And it was genuinely one of the saddest days ever when he came back from preschool one day about the time of his 4th birthday, and he announced that he no longer liked pink and that his favourite colour was now blue. It was one of those events that, in true blogging fashion, I've committed to words via one of my musical parodies. It's possible I might have mentioned this once or 19 times before, that I sang my version of the Psychedelic Furs Pretty in Pink at Brit Mum's BML conference last year. But anyway, let's move on from that. Over the course of the last 10, 15, 20 years, maybe a bit longer, there's been a growing equality in terms of strong female characters in both film and TV. I mean, if you go back to even as recently as the early 1980s, there weren't really that many strong female roles, and many actresses were reduced to the role of eye candy, love interest, or damsels in distress, and usually a combination of all three. But you can trace a lineage through Cagney and Lacey to Homeland's Carrie Mathison via the more recent Star Wars films, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the ultimate subversion of the blonde cheerleader in distress. And everywhere we look nowadays, there are strong female characters for our daughters and our sons to associate with and look up to. And it's certainly a far cry from when I was growing up, when pretty much the only female lead characters you saw on TV were the Bionic Woman, which was basically just a cheap spin-off from the $6 Million Man, and Laverne and Shirley. So, I mean, Simon, do you find that your daughter is drawn towards any other particular TV or film role models? And, again, do you find that does she gravitate towards female characters, or does she not really differentiate between them?
Actually, one thing, just to go back to the wider point you're making about strong female characters, I would say it's not always enough just to be about strong female characters. There's actually quite a lot of strong female characters in the action adventure or superhero genre, sci-fi genre, but often they're not the protagonist. And there's this thing called the Trinity complex, I think it is, and it comes from the Matrix films, where the character of Trinity is this super cool, strong female character, but actually her sole purpose in the film is to enable the male character who's a bit rubbish to fulfill his journey and then become the super cool guy. And you see it in a lot of movies. Well, you could even level it at Star Wars, where you've got Princess Leia, but her whole point of her being there in the first film is really to enable Luke to kind of have his journey. While these strong female characters are great, there's still, at a certain point, if this carries on, she'll notice that they're not the lead character all the time. And that's why it's great having the Star Wars films. The last two new Star Wars films both have lead female characters, which is awesome. And then, sorry, to go your specific point, yes, I mean, she does like, I think I referenced it before, she does like stories with girls and with women, but it's not exclusively so. She still, in terms of talking about Batman, she still loves Batman, the character. Like one of her favorite characters of all is the Hulk. I think a lot of children like the Hulk because he acts like a spoiled toddler all the time. He just can't quite understand the world around him and starts breaking things instead of using reason. But she sees a story with girls in it, she likes it. And I think she knows her friends like that too as well. So it's kind of partly about working with her peers and fitting in with that as well. And the kind of stories they play at school are, at the moment, they've got this thing called the Fairy Gang, which I'm very confused about what that means. And they also play princesses. And I say, how do you play princesses? And often it seems to be involving them going on adventures. And like Rapunzel, has superpowered hair, and Elsa with her ice powers. And actually, it sounds like they're playing superheroes, essentially. But they've kind of labelled it as playing princesses.
Yeah, Disney's changed a lot, hasn't it, over the past few years, kind of the way they present princess. It's very different from where it started with Snow White and Cinderella.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Amie, you've already talked about Little Miss attaching herself to certain four-wheeled characters and also wanting to be Beast rather than Beauty. But I know we've talked in the past that she's latched on to certain characters in books as well, hasn't she, that aren't necessarily female-oriented.
She has, yeah. Yeah, I mean, books is obviously huge for us. One of the big ones is Rosie Revere, Engineer, which I've spoken about. That's a fantastic one because it's all about girls being good at maths and engineering, and kind of books that are starting to get girls interested in STEM activities and thinking. But, we also have books about ballerinas, and she loves playing ballerinas. And to Simon's point, Moana's the one that everyone's been talking about, and we haven't seen it yet because we tend to buy movies on Apple TV and then fast forward through the bits that are too scary because she isn't quite 3 yet. But we were really, really excited about it, and that's a character I would love for her to look up to. But then I've also heard, exactly as Simon said, actually Moana's kind of supporting a kind of anti-hero male character, and you kind of like, oh, okay,
It's funny with us when it comes to things like superhero shows and films, the boys aren't really that interested. Whereas Cara, who thinks she can do everything her older brothers can do already, has really been drawn into the current TV incarnation of Supergirl. It probably helps that her alter ego shares the same name. Like that character, we spell our daughter's name with a K as well. But she's as comfortable watching Supergirl and wanting to imitate her as she is watching Frozen, or even the more old-fashioned Disney films. Now, both of you have daughters rather than sons, but if you did have boys, can you picture what kind of conversations you might have with them to ensure that they don't automatically get locked into male stereotypes?
I think there's two things for me. The first is obviously presenting them with a female role model in myself and in my partner as well. Like, my partner does the cooking and the cleaning in the house, but we both work. So it's about presenting kind of a balance between us. And then your son or your daughter will kind of pick up on that and realise that just because one of us is male and one of us is female doesn't define our role, certainly in a domestic or a work sense. But I do worry that the boys are actually being left behind at the moment. I think certainly my generation of women, my mums and probably the girls coming up now, we've really pushed hard with this whole feminist agenda, whether we realised that's what we were doing or not. And actually, no one's really having those conversations with boys from what I can see on a wide scale thing. And they don't have those role models in the way that girls have really gone and searched for them, celebrities, authors, whoever it might be, to find those strong characters. And to, Beyonce, for example, who's doing that for the guys who are coming up now? I don't know. I would really like to see it be an equal discussion and really presenting boys with not only, when I say strong male role models, I obviously don't mean in strength of physicality. I mean strength of character, whether that's they're sensitive, they're smart, they think of other people, whatever it is. Otherwise, sexism is just going to swing the other way, and that's not equality. So I don't really know what the conversation is I'd have with my son. I haven't really thought that far because I don't have a son. But it does worry me that those conversations aren't happening.
And any thoughts on that, Simon?
Only that I don't know what kind of conversations I have with my son, because it's so interesting that so much of what I am as a parent and what I talk about and also what I have explored around feminism and women's issues and female empowerment is really developed since I've been a parent. And it's not that I didn't care about that before. It's just more I didn't kind of get into the minutiae of everything. In terms of doing that with a son, it's just something almost impossible for me to think what those conversations would be, because having a daughter has kind of helped define the kind of parent I am. So I don't know what kind of parent I would be if I had just a son.
It's interesting that the way I behave as a parent is probably different now that we have two boys and a girl, as opposed to just having two boys. And I'm much more conscious about finding positive examples and role models who are female for the boys as well as for Cara. Although, I mean, to your point earlier, Amie, it is actually quite hard to find positive male role models these days as well. So, I mean, that's kind of an interesting thought.
It's about redefining masculinity, isn't it? It's not something anyone's really doing at the moment. Yeah,
and finding a middle ground where the boys can discover whatever that new definition of masculinity is that they're comfortable with. I mean, a slightly frivolous example in terms of role models. I mean, the kids have become recently more than a little obsessed with a TV show called Ninja Warrior, which, if you're not familiar with it, sees contestants taking on an ultra difficult obstacle course. It's a bit like the Krypton Factor on steroids. If anyone's old enough to remember that.
We are, Tim.
One of the things the kids latched onto very quickly is that male and female contestants take on the exact same course. So, a big thumbs up for equality there. But at least on the UK version of the show, what that means is because of the greater physicality of most of the male competitors, the vast majority of successful ones tend to be men. And it was something I ended up discussing with the boys about, why that is. And after a quick bit of research, you've got to love YouTube. I dug out a video featuring a female competitor named Jessie Graf, who not so much completed as demolished the US course in a manner which would have given Supergirl a run for her money, which is funny because her day job is as a stuntwoman on that very show. And having just slightly tortuously brought this discussion full circle back to where we started, let's move on. Just to bring the mood down a bit, let's talk about death. Now, my mother-in-law passed away a few weeks ago. It was sudden and yet not. She'd had multiple sclerosis for over 40 years and she'd been in a nursing home for the past 5 with diminishing quality of life. So in many ways we were ready for the call that came in the small hours one morning, and yet, of course you can never be truly ready for it. Stepping away from me for a minute, Amie, you also experienced death in your family quite recently. So, talk us through that a little bit, and to what extent Little Miss had any understanding of what was going on.
So my dad's mum, who I call Grandmo, because her name was Moira, she passed away early November. She'd been diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago this coming summer, I think. But it was completely manageable, and it was what they call old lady cancer. So you basically end up with breast cancer because you haven't produced estrogen for such a long time. It's like a reaction. So they just put you on estrogen pills and it kind of stops it growing and it's all fine. But she reached a point where she was so old and weak that even the pills couldn't kind of stop it. So over the past year, she's grown steadily weaker, and we kind of knew that something wasn't right. But Grandma being Grandma wouldn't kind of acknowledge it, and she just kept saying I'm fine, and she's doing her own thing. And then eventually I went out for her birthday in August, and it was just the change since I'd seen her in about May was unbelievable, because she lives practically on the northern border, so I don't get to see her that often. And I kind of rang my dad and said she needs to see a doctor, and within about 2 weeks she was given a terminal illness sentence of 4 weeks left to live. So felt very sudden and very quick, but it kind of wasn't, as you said. We knew it was going to come eventually, not least because she was mid-80s. But because we didn't see her very often, Little Miss didn't really know her, which in a way made it very easy. She understood that Grandma was our grandma and that she was sick, but it wasn't the same as, God forbid, touch wood, this won't happen. But like if my mum passed away, for example, I think she'd be devastated because she's so close to my mum, and she'd just be really confused because she wouldn't be seeing her every other day, and I'd have no idea how we'd even start to have those conversations. We were lucky that, to be honest, there wasn't much of a conversation to be had with Little Miss about Grandma because she didn't really know her that well.
Yeah, and I guess with the age that she's at the moment, there's only so much that you can really explain that she would be able to understand and rationalise anyway. But I mean, has it made you think about the kind of conversations that you might have with her? Should this happen again when she's maybe 4, 5, 6 years old?
In truth, no. I probably should start thinking about that.
And what about you, Simon? I know you haven't had to deal directly with death with your daughter yet, but she turned 5 last month, didn't she? And I know you've kind of broached the topic of death with her already. So tell us a little bit about how you've done that.
I can't remember how I thought about this, but it was just the idea that should something happen to either myself or my wife or one of our parents or something, and just how she'd even begin to process that. So I just wanted to introduce the idea of mortality, I guess, into her life through stories and just the kind of stories we'd engage in and conversations we'd have at the back of that. My parents, both our parents are in their 60s, 70s, nearly 80s as well, and it's something that's going to happen. So just various stories. So one was, I remember she's a big Mog fan, so we read Goodbye Mog. I don't know if you've read that, but kind of earlier than I thought we might, because I thought that was just a good way of introducing the idea of mortality into this conversation in an interesting way. And also, as referenced before, like the superheroes are something that we engage in a lot of the stories, and so many of those origin stories involve the death of parents, whether Batman, Superman, who loses an entire planet, Spider-Man, who causes the death of his father figure. These are all aspects that kind of come up in these stories as well. And I've just been made very clear as well, just the concept that death is just part of life. That's what life is. There's no life without death. It's something that just happens all around us. And I just don't want her to be scared of it. But the idea that things are finite, that it won't last forever, but not to be scared about that's the norm.
I think it's great actually that you've done that kind of proactively, and it's much easier to have those conversations in advance, as it were. rather than having to try and explain an event after it's happened. I mean, with Isaac, this was kind of second time round for him. I mean, he was not quite 4 when we first had to talk to him about death after my mother-in-law's partner passed away. Now, he's, even from quite a young age, he's always been quite an empathetic soul. So I ended up having quite in-depth discussions with him, certainly much more so than I ever would have thought that I would have with a kid so young. We talked about what had happened, how he felt about it, and the realisation that he too, like everyone else, would die one day. And out of that, he even expressed how sad he would be if I died, which actually, just thinking about it, makes me well up every time. And it must have been the first time in his young life that mortality and the inevitability of one's life ending or changing over the years really crossed his mind. And it's quite a watershed moment, I think, in a young life. We ended up buying a book called Always and Forever, which is aimed specifically at younger children, that framed and explored the concept of death and its emotional aftermath in the context of a group of animal friends. But now you've mentioned it, Simon, I could just as well have bought him pretty much any comic book. I remember at the time it had a real impact on him. We ended up reading that book probably a week and a half consecutively every night in a row, and it did really encourage him to talk about the subject openly. And I think that's probably benefited him. I think in many ways it's almost tougher to be the parent in that conversation. This time round with Heather's mum, Isaac's 9 now. He even expressed an interest in attending the funeral, so we left that option open to him to make a final choice the day before. And sure enough, he came down with us. As much out of curiosity as wanting to say goodbye, I guess. But the other two, at 7 and 4, we decided not to let either of them attend. With Toby, to be fair, it was marginal. If he'd really expressed an interest in coming, we probably would have let him. But it's interesting, he's responded. He internalises a lot of his emotions, so he's not really spoken openly about how he feels about his nana having died. But we have seen some emotional outbursts from him over the last week or so, and he's started to crawl into our bed in the middle of the night. So he's obviously unsettled emotionally. So we think that might be his reaction and his way of responding to what's happened. Cara was pretty much unaffected, whereas Isaac at 4 was quite emotionally invested and curious about death. It's clearly not something that she's really grasped as a concept in her mind yet, and there's a bit of me that's a little bit surprised, maybe even a little bit disappointed in that, but I can't say I'm overly unhappy for her to remain insulated in her little bubble. On that subject, any thoughts on what the right age to start talking openly about death with kids is, and when it's okay to start consider letting them attend the funeral? I mean, Simon, obviously you've had those discussions already, but would you have any particular kind of time in mind for when you would allow your daughter to attend the funeral?
No, I think I'd always just, I think like you did with your children, you engaged them in conversation and kind of made the judgment then. And I guess I'd be of the mind that she would attend a funeral of someone, a friend or a family member. As from my perspective and with our daughter, I'm always trying to engage her with these things. She's not one to get freaked out in that sense, and I think she'd be more intrigued, and it would be good sort of for her to understand almost about the grieving process, that's why these events exist, is for people to remember the life of someone, and that's an important part of the grieving process. And in terms of the right age, I think just for us, it was when she could start understanding stories, and that would be part of it. When I was an uncle first, which is 20 years ago now, it would be an uncomfortable question about, whether you see something and someone would die on screen in the story and you say, oh, they're just asleep or they're just doing something. And when those kind of moments occurred with me as a parent, I didn't want to do that. So I've never lied to her. And it's been an opportunity to talk about something. I guess I've always tried to confront those things head on. And we've never had any conversations yet where she's been freaked out or said, I don't want anyone to die. I don't want you to die. I think she's processing it all, and I think that's the key. It's just like the goal for me doing it, for us doing it as parents, was to just be able to process stuff in her own time, but we didn't want to freak her out. And fingers crossed, so far we seem to have got the balance right.
One of the things I observed from Isaac coming along and attending the funeral was that I think it kind of exposed him to the different range of emotions you have around the funeral. So yeah, one of the things that he really took out of it, it's not just about the grieving process and mourning loss, which, of course it is to a large extent, but it was also about remembering a life and celebrating it. And he kind of got that, and I think he understood that, it's one of those, a funeral is one of those strange things where you have that mix of emotions where, you have sadness, but you also have joy. And it brings people and families back together, which, I guess is a good lesson for him to learn. I mean, Amie, any thoughts about you in terms of, when you would start talking openly with little Miss about it?
Yeah, I've been trying to think what my parents did, to be honest. I remember my mum lost an uncle to a very sudden heart attack when I was like 6, because she had to fly back to the UK and come and basically sort the whole family out, because she was the only one who kept her cool. And then when I think I was 9 or 8, my great grandfather died, who she was very close to, and I wasn't allowed at the funeral. I remember another family member staying behind with me. But then my partner's brother and sister, who were 12 and 10, but last summer for the funerals, they would have been 11 and 9, and they came. And, we've had those difficult conversations, and my partner in particular with his little brother has kind of had a couple of conversations of, how are you doing? Because he was very close to his aunt and things. And I don't really know I don't think we would maybe have a specific conversation with little Miss. I mean, she's 3 in March, and same as Simon, like it comes up in books, and we don't really hide the fact that they've died. We just don't really have an in-depth conversation about it. But then she is a bit young to have anything deep and meaningful. So I don't really know at the moment, if I'm honest. I think it's probably something that we will acknowledge, and, it happens, and it's not something we will actively hide. We're not going to... You hear stories of kids who they reach like 15 and realise that there's a whole other section to the film about the dog Yella. The dog dies, and everyone's like, oh my God, my mum used to just finish the film before it all happened. I never realised.
Yeah, every circumstance, every child is different, aren't they? I mean, I was a few months shy of 7, I think, when I attended my first funeral, that of my dad's father in Malaysia. I do have some really clear memories of seeing Grandpa in his coffin and attending the funeral and scattering earth on the coffin and all that kind of stuff. No lasting emotional scars as such, but it certainly left a mark. I think going through the whole process again with Heather's mum, it certainly made me think a lot more about how we'll handle things should either of my parents die in the next few years. I mean, both my parents are in their late 70s, and all 3 kids are very close to both of them, so it would really hit all 3 of them hard. And one thing that struck me was listening to the eulogy for Heather's mum. It made me realise that I need to fill in some of the gaps in my knowledge about my parents' earlier lives while I still can. And it's really given me a bit of a nudge to do something about making plans in the event that something should happen to one of us. Finally get the wills done that I've been putting off for a couple of years, discussing preferred funeral arrangements, all that kind of stuff. And they're the kind of slightly morbid tasks and conversations that nobody ever really wants to have until it's too late. But maybe now it's time to start. I guess it is the ultimate bucket list. So, anyway, those are a few thoughts on how we cope with death, both as parents and children. I'm off now to work out exactly why my wife has taken out such a big life insurance policy on me. and why she spent the whole of this weekend sharpening the knives in the kitchen. So before we go, what have you guys been up to the past week or two? Simon?
Well, as discussed, Lego is a big thing in our house. So we a nice perk of blogging. We got invited to the premiere of the Lego Batman movie by Lego. So we kind of went up to Leicester Square to see that, and they had lots of like good kid activities in the foyer, like face painting, and they were doing caricatures and superimposing you on the film poster, and then we saw the movie, which was great. And then Lego kind of hosted a lunch for us as well. So we kind of went off to Planet Hollywood, and then also because it's right in Leicester Square, we were right by Chinatown. It was around the weekend of Chinese New Year celebrations, and they've been learning all about that at school that week. So it was great. You got to see some dragons and all the lanterns up there. I think you went up there as well, Tim, that weekend.
I did, yes.
Yes, and it was just such a way to bring it to life, what she'd been learning about in class that week. So yeah, that was probably that was last weekend. That was one of our highlights. That was really good.
Cool. How about you, Amy?
My other half has been away on a ski weekend with his dad, having some father-son time. So it's been really, really nice, because that means that I've had some one-on-one time with little miss. And it's funny, we moved here a year ago last week, and at the time I wasn't working, and it was the last 2 weeks before I went back to work. And it really made me realise how little we get time, just the two of us. Of course, a year ago it was kind of 5 days a week, just the two of us. And to be honest, I was running low on enthusiasm many of those days. I was looking forward to going back to work, and yeah, it was just really lovely. We had so much fun, and we went for baby chinos, and we met a friend for a walk, and we went to the bookshop, and just did kind of all our favourite things together. And we watched some old movies, and we watched a Disney movie, and it was just really nice.
I saw you watch Wizard of Oz. Is that right?
We did, yeah. Well, she's been reading the book, and she's got a simplified version of the storybook, and she's really into the Wicked Witch and everything. So I thought, well, we'll give it a go. And as usual, if anything's too scary, we can fast forward. Having been absolutely fascinated by the Wicked Witch, she's always the Wicked Witch, and I'm always made to be Dorothy when we play. The Wicked Witch in the film was too scary, so we did have to fast forward every time the Wicked Witch came on. And it's been a while since I watched it, and I'd forgotten how much of the movie the Wicked Witch is actually in. It's like, there's half the movie gone. But, I'm sure it's one we'll watch many, many times again.
As for us, as Simon said, we were also in London for celebrating Chinese New Year, which is something we do every year with the kids. It's Monday night as we record this episode, so I am currently propping my eyes open with cocktail sticks, having stayed up to watch the Super Bowl last night, but by God, it was worth it. And we are bracing ourselves for Parents' Evening 3 times over at school tomorrow, which is...
Yikes.
Which is always entertaining. It's always an exercise in reading between the lines to work out as much what's not being said as what is actually being said. That's it for another episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the three of us online. Amy? I am findingourfeet.co.uk, though I'm actually in the middle of a bit of a writing hiatus at the moment as I settle into my new job. So instead, why not find me on social media where I'm actually still doing things, and that's Instagram at Finding Our Feet. And Twitter is a bit of a change of handle, and that's at Amie Caitlin, AMIE. And Simon?
Yeah, and I blog as Man vs Pink, Man vs Pink, and manvspink.com, or on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and other places. That's where you'll find me.
And I'm at Thatcham Dad, and my blog is slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and on Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. Do please give us a follow on Twitter at ParentsPodcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thanks for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.